The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the most super intelligent force and power of love and creation possible, also known as my true essence, soul, or nature, forever. What is happening? Benton here, Saturday morning, coming to you live from the backseat of a Nissan Versa hatchback, parked on the streets of Los Angeles after moving. Yes, fired up the old Versa. It started and moved on down the road to another parking spot. Shout out to Joe Moore. Thanks for being here, sir. Shout out to the chat. Shout out to Replay Crew. And Indefensible Hell Realm. Oh man, I made the mistake of clicking on a headline earlier about politics, and it's man, that's where I got the idea for Indefensible. The original title was Today in Hell Realm, and I thought about Indefensible is an accurate description of this place. And again, technically speaking, in the past I've referred to it or as heaven or hell realm, presently manifesting as a hell realm, based on the notion that if enough individuals, pulled themselves up by their internal bootstraps within themselves and grew and changed and evolved mind, body, and spirit, that eventually, the quality of the masses, right, the individuals that comprise the mass, well, that would, a rising tide lifts all boats, as they say. And then, eventually society would potentially morph into something that could be more akin to heaven. Now, that was prior to notions of me understanding, or the royal we, right, understanding that this place exists via delusion and knowing this implicitly. Certainly, these ideas I read many years ago, studying various spiritual and religious texts, right? But back to moving the car around, and then, at times I find it necessary to discuss various mundanities of life in this indefensible realm, vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm that the royal we find ourselves in. Uh, Man, goodness. But yeah, I moved last week because there was some sort of event. Well, there was an event in the park here in LA, and more signs this week. So we hopped on the freeway. The royal we hopped on the freeway, drove hopefully far enough to keep the battery charged for the next time the old Versa needs to fire up. Threw $5 in gas in. Why not? Keeping the tank above, at or above half a tank, as still have a few bucks. Not out of money yet, but here it comes. As the StreamYard, the free 20 hours dwindle down. Uh, there's still money, perhaps, for the outrageous amounts of money that StreamYard demands. And not that I'm necessarily dependent on StreamYard, but it's working so far. Something about that vibrating icon, as others in the so-called truth community have figured out how to use these various StreamYard layouts and make the screen look all fancy. I've never quite explored such myself. Um, yeah, I guess there's not too much more to say about the parking situation other than I am back to a spot that I was parked in last time I was in Los Angeles prior to going back to truck driving for a mere 7 weeks. And I do like this spot, although it makes my walks to the store considerably longer. Um, Although I need to walk, I haven't been walking as much as normal when I'm in the city. Been laying around, getting stoned. And yeah, not that there's anything wrong with that. Hopefully, there's a couple of cars parked around here. Hopefully, there's nobody. I'm waking up with my loud ass voice. But what I like about this parking spot over here is it does seem to be a little warmer for whatever reason, um, overall. And although the drawback is we get direct sunlight onto the driver's side windows for at least an hour or two in the afternoons, so the car heats up even more than otherwise. Um, that's okay. I don't need to be going to sleep quite so early anyway. Although I've been staying up till 8 p.m., 9 p.m., somewhere in there. So this should work out nicely. But my favorite part is that I can open the passenger door all the way and it does not obstruct the sidewalk. So passersby are able to get, I'm not interfering with foot or bike or scooter or whatever traffic may be coming by. I'm not a fan of inconveniencing uh, whatever these things are, right? Uh, I clicked on a YouTube video this morning, and the normies or the NPCs or the whatever we're calling these folks, the civilians, maybe we'll call them civilians, making videos about, uh, people are different now. There's been a shift now. Normies have started talking about timelines and all of these things. And some fella from Kentucky talking about, I guess, going to the Kentucky Derby and these various events and how it's, what people are way different now at these functions. And, a lot of folks blame it on the pandemic, which is certainly a factor. However, that in conjunction with the screens and the smartphones and whatever the smartphones is doing to people, I would say the smartphone is at least, as responsible. And then as for these changes, and then as the generations change, as Gen Z and millennials supplant more of the Gen X and the boomers, and then millennials, some of them being supplanted by Gen Z. And, and this is a bit of a freestyle, uh, stream. I'm in some ways planning to do this for myself in a way, but, something I heard, listening to some of these channels about, there's the Mike Andes, the little fella in the Augusta Lawn Care, the yellow, always in a yellow polo. Anybody seen this guy in their feed? Maybe it's just me. I don't know. And oh my goodness, I wish I had made notes yesterday. As I watch almost all of his content, or I'll listen to at least parts of all of his videos, pretty much. He's got a couple of different channels, but uh, he's apparently a really good business consultant, and so he travels in order to make YouTube videos. He travels and does these business turnarounds. So he, for free to these businesses, he offers his consulting services. But we get to film you and interview you and all of these things. Not you, the listener, but and so it was these two old ladies, and this the owner was in her 60s, and this real type A personality type of woman, and she had her right hand was another lady, um, about her age, but a little bit of a lower class lady, and neither one of them. The video is like an hour and a half. I think I've got maybe 30 minutes left. I will go back to it, but they don't stop talking the entire time. Both of the ladies, they talk the whole time, and they even do something I've noticed that I first really began to notice with the meth heads is it seems like, and this is my speculation, when a person reaches a certain, experience level or duration of amphetamine use slash abuse, right? Whether methamphetamine, Adderall, whatever we're talking about, it seems like they develop an ability. Well, first they're unable to. They must verbally respond to almost everything that happens around them, or is spoken. They must immediately respond. They always have something to say, and then, but they listen. This is the difference: is they're listening versus some folks who will you know take over the conversation or speak in order to not have to listen, because they're not going to listen anyway. And some of the commenters were like, wow, these ladies, they're not listening. And I didn't bother to reply. I'm actually replying to YouTube comments less and less, but no, they're absolutely hearing what's happening. It's that they're so sped up on these amphetamines, you know um, they're on top of every detail, right? They're with it, they're in the moment, they're listening, they're actively engaged. It's quite a sight to behold. It's on Mike Andy's main channel if anybody wants to check it out, but I think it's his most recent video. um, Fascinating. And I'm actually, oh, I remember why I brought all this up. So they're hiring now, so these boomer women, and Gen X slash boomer women, I guess boomers, their experience. And this one lady, and I failed to mention, this has been a successful lawn care and other, home service business. This lady's been successfully kicking ass in business for like 38 years. Like, she's very successful in her business. And in fact, appears to be one of these people that's not, she's financially, modest probably, and has, money. She seems secure and not that motivated. She seems more wanting to serve the customer and be, good to her employees, and to do a really good job for the customers. A very old school notion, something I was raised up with, born in a time warp in Southeast Arkansas, on the edge of the Mississippi River Delta, the most historically, backwards, impoverished, uneducated, violent region of the country. But, so I grew up, imbued with and around folks imbued with a lot of these, old school notions around, a day's work and providing a service and sort of putting your name on it. And, all of these things back in the day when, the customer really was right. And, it reminds me, and I know I'm rambling a bit, but I will bring this back around. But it reminds me that when I got my very first debit card in Fayetteville, Arkansas in the 90s, McElroy Bank, which was later, it was started by the Walton family, I'm almost certain, or maybe they started Arvest Bank and bought out McElroy. Either way, it was kind of a local bank at the time, regional local bank. And, being new to debit cards, I checked my balance, 50 cents for a balance inquiry, and it fucking bounced. And I am, immediately either had to wait for the bank to open. I was an early bird even back then, apparently, or maybe either way. I marched my happy ass into the bank branch, just slapped it, down on the counter, uh, you know, the ATM receipt or whatever this was. I don't, it's been so long, I don't remember what paperwork I would have gotten. Maybe I had to go print out my statement. Who the fuck knows? And I just slapped it on the counter, and I was like, I don't know what this is, but I fully expect this to be resolved immediately. And that was my attitude. And I'm polite, but friendly, behaving properly, but very stern, and a certain attitude of, hey, I'm the customer. What the fuck is this? And then this is kind of a new thing, right? So, and then also, well, surely the bank doesn't intend that I'm going to pay, in 1996, I'm going to pay $17 because I somehow managed to bounce a 50-cent balance inquiry. Meanwhile, the machine was happy. It could have just said, well, you don't have any money in the first place. And they just took care of it. They didn't, there was no blaming of me. Well, sir, well, you did this, and the lady was like, oh, okay, concerned, and then just went and resolved it. And I was like, thank you very much. Have a good day. And I was out the door, you know. So these ladies seem to be from that world where this is just how things operated, right? This was just the norm. And as we know, the royal we knows, and a lot of the listeners here to this channel, Well, I mean, there's not even a lot of listeners these days, and that's okay. But a lot of us, a lot of the folks around these parts, and also in the larger so-called truth community, and people of a certain age from the middle part of the country, this is what we're used to. So you can tell these boomer, especially the owner is she's her customers for the most part are even older than her. So this is all of these, I think these are mores in sociology. All of these, just what's sort of built into society and expected and acted upon, social contract and just what's considered normal or was considered normal when I was being socialized. As we know, that's all gone and that's all over with, never to return, right? It's never coming back, folks. It was not in place because that was people used to be better in the olden days and that was the system they came up with. No, it was that way because that's what served Moloch's machine back in the day. That's what Moloch's machine needed to have happen. So that's why people were that way. Let me not lecture, though. Let me calm down, take a breath, Benton. Benton allowing himself to become temporarily annoyed. So chill out, Bubba. Have a sip of water. And yeah, anyway. So she's going through Gen Z worker after Gen Z worker after Gen Z worker, to mow these yards and do all this work. Now, what I would say is, I think she should just, if she's going to hire in that age group, she should probably find some gals. I hate to say it, because the fellas who are with, let's call it what it is. The fellas who are with it and are actually able to, have some capabilities, have some drive, have some determination, have some focus, they're not going to be in a business like that for very long, right? That's going to be a stepping stone. Somebody's going to snatch them up. So she's, churning through Gen Z male after Gen Z male, and it's not that my generation was any better. I remember, when I entered the workforce, it's not like I was some great worker either. But I was able to show up on time for the most part and actually do the work. Um, of course I was, but back to these Gen Zs, and I'm not one of these, Gen Z doesn't want to work, Gen Z doesn't want to do this. Gen Z's changing the game, folks, and that's why I'm bringing. Now, I'm not necessarily for the better. They're changing the game on behalf of Moloch's machine. They're changing the game based on how they're being programmed. They're not some like psychologically fucking independent group of people but they are superior in certain ways. This is important to recognize. Just like every generation they are superior in some ways. This is the new version. And it's a very old fogyish, in my view, to be curmudgeonly towards the kids, right? Because I remember being one of the kids back in the day, and sort of denigrated and talked down to and treated a certain type of way by the old fogies, and being a young person possessed of youth, right? That's relevance. To be an actual young person, late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, even into the late 20s, an actual young person, right? That's the holy grail. That's what society, even more so than money, right? That's what society, especially American society, seems to honor above all is actual youth, right? And I've identified Gen X, my generation, as forever young. In our minds, we will always be young no matter what. Well, we're old, folks. Hate to break it to us, we're old. It's happened. I happen to enjoy it myself, for whatever reason. But so, Mike Andes is trying to get through to this lady, more or less saying it without saying it, like, hey, this is a different worker. These people are different, right? And the fact is, Mike basically just says, like, these workers are simply not going to respond in the way that your past workers did generationally. It's simply not going to happen. So what Mike Andes is saying is, look, Gen Z is not coming down here for you to micromanage them. This was 19, this was 19, and Mike didn't say it this way, right? This is my commentary. Back in the olden days, and the lady's more or less describing her hiring process as they show up, one of two of these old ladies is breathing down their neck all day, right? This is the training. Maybe both of them breathing down the neck. And remember, neither one of them shuts the fuck up. even when they're talking to each other. They both talk the whole time. It's crazy. And, this idea of, in the olden times, it just maybe in the Depression era mindset, people were so desperate for jobs, perhaps they would show up out of desperation and just stand there while someone watched them like a hawk and attempted to micromanage them. And, it's almost like their hand starts to move to go, to do something. And the person's already on top of them, anticipating that they're about to do it wrong. And then, to try to give the verbal instructions. Well, Gen Z's autistic, number one. Gen Z can't show up, right? Let's just call it what it is. Autistic Gen Z can't show up without being put through a training course, right? And have some boomer think that they are already trained. And then boomers just say, well, it's common sense. We're mowing yards out here. Okay, boomer, that may be true, but you want the yard mowed in a certain way. And you've known Miss Such and Such for 50 years, and Miss Such and Such fully expects that her stoop, or her steps are always going to be blown off or swept off in a certain manner, right? Things are going to be done properly. And this is also, in my keen observances of human behavior, these people are also trap setters, right? Whether they know they're setting traps or not, the lady that owns this place, here comes Gen Z, right? Doesn't want to be there in the first place. Who can blame them? But maybe trying to be toxically positive and put a good spin on things, right? And attempt to do a good job. And so on the one hand, the boomers like basically like, hey, it's common sense, and we're just mowing yards. But then Gen Z might be like, well, okay, if that's the case, why are you here standing 6 inches away from me, breathing down my neck, right? Like, it has to be. How can it be both things simultaneously? And it's this inability of the older folks to see things through the eyes of the younger generation and to sort of relate to that experience on some level. But Mike Andes is basically like, look, you're churning through workers because they show up and you micromanage them, and Gen Z's simply not going to work for you if you micromanage them. And apparently what's happened is every time they manage to hire a worker that's halfway decent, that the old ladies consider halfway decent, and manage to retain them. And of course, as we know, they're only there for some period of time, because if they're any good, somebody else is going to hire them. And I think they had one long-time employee who you can just tell is, he's good enough to be competent on their job, but he's not desirable, to other businesses necessarily. Nobody's snatched him up yet, right? Nobody's recruited him. But yeah, these traps are set, right? And how many, once the third trap is sprung on Gen Z, Miss Such and Such's steps have to be swept off. And then the boomer behaves as if now the Gen Z's being treated as if they're morons who've done something wrong. Okay. And this is where the shame comes in, guilt and shame. Now, here's how this was the training program for boomers. Boomers showed up on the job, and the mechanism whereby they were trained was, oh, it's common sense. Everybody knows how to do this. What's wrong with you, dummy? And then combined with being admonished and guilt and shame applied in the moment, right? And that was considered a better society also, folks. And I know people my age and older that I know y'all know what I'm talking about. You've just forgotten that this is how it used to be, because you paid and again, apologies for using the pronoun you. Let me back up. I'm training myself out of this habit. I'm like I've caught my, I'm like the puppy that's soiled the carpet. But I'm also the dog's person, right? I'm the dog's human. I've caught myself soiling the carpet. I'm rubbing my own nose in it by speaking in this manner. This is how I'm going to untrain myself. And so many folks entered a workforce that was this way, right? Well, now we have the corporatization of everything all the time. Gen Z and millennials, this has not been their experience, right? And they don't, here's the thing about Gen Z, they don't process things this way. When a boomer shows up trying to administer, oh, it's easy, we're doing something so basic, a monkey could do it, but then, oh, wait a minute, you didn't read my mind, and it's in my mind, right, that Miss Such and Such's steps have to be treated in a certain way after we mow her yard. And because that's in my mind, it has to be in everybody else's mind. This is also a very common thing. I don't know if people have y'all have ever noticed this, where if something is in someone else's mind, they have trouble relating to the fact that it's not in my mind. Because remember, if I'm Gen Z in this scenario and it's day one on the job, but in boomer old lady business owner's mind, it's like, hey, we're just out here. It's yard work. It's easy, right? It's a piece of fucking cake. Well, if that's the case, why are you here to train me? Like, it can't be both things, and it reminds me, and I know again I'm rambling, but I am doing this stream for myself to some extent. It reminds me of being picked up on Mexican day labor. And yes, I've stood outside the Home Depot with the hombres and the amigos many times, hundreds of times. I got picked up to in Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon, and Austin, Texas, the two places I could almost always get work for whatever reason, at least, once or twice a week. And Portland paid quite well, I must say, very generous at the time. And I got picked up, and I always tell them I'm unskilled labor, but here's the thing: is I have intelligence and a brain, and I come across as very capable. So at a certain point, I find myself on a ladder hammering nails into boards after I'd already had the conversation with the fella, I was working with that day, rather, that I was allowing to employ me for the day, that I was renting my time to. And I already had the discussion down on the ground, because I'm not going up that ladder to start hammering nails until we understand that, hey, I'm not a motherfucking carpenter, right? I need it described to me what the fuck is expected of me. Like, I'm going to know what are the job expectations before I go up there and start. And next thing you know, I'm hammering in based on the instructions, and he's standing down there trying to add more and more to it. And at a certain point, I'm like, hey, man, you're describing to me how to perform carpentry. I said, if it was possible for you to describe to me how to do carpentry in the moment, this would not be a skilled job, sir. Like, what are we doing? So I was basically like, hey, man, you're going to have to, I'm coming down the ladder, you're going up the ladder to do this, or you're going to shut the fuck up and I'm going to do what you told me to do when I was on the ground. Now, I have ways of communicating this without getting punched in the face, because remember, this is, me as a grown man and still had my muscles and my strength back then. And, this is another grown man, probably bigger and stronger than I am. Like, I have to convey this in a certain type of way. But my point was, hey, man, I'm an unskilled laborer. You've hired an unskilled laborer, and you're now describing to the unskilled laborer how to do carpentry. Well, in the old days, this is probably how this guy learned how to be a carpenter. They were just like, oh, it's common sense. And he just stood there hammering on shit, and they, guilt and shamed him into being a motherfucking carpenter. Right. Well, I'm not on that program. I'm not going to be treated like I'm stupid. Right. Because I don't have the ability to envision whatever's in this guy's head. Because this guy's standing on the ground. He's got a vision in his head, and he lacks the intelligence to understand that vision is not also in my head. He doesn't understand that I can't see what he's seeing. I have no frame of reference, sir. No frame of reference. And while I'm watching this Mike Andes video, I'm, aware of all of this. As Mike is attempting to, he's very patient and tolerant. His dad was a pastor, apparently, or is a pastor. Mike, very patient and tolerant. And he just, to her credit, the type A lady owner, she's a lady, you could just tell her directly what the score is and she will accept it unless she knows otherwise. Right. So she's just, accepting what he's telling her. But he's like, hey, they're not going to work for you if you micromanage them. Full stop. Now, perhaps they will go work. Now, Mike doesn't say this, but yeah, they might go work for a corporation, although they would probably prefer to support local businesses, perhaps, in this whatever this town is. But, a corporation has like an orientation, a training, formalized processes. It's communicated explicitly what's expected of them in every given scenario, right? Also known as how to deal with autistic people. It's almost like the society, Moloch's machine, corporatism, all of these systems of man. It's almost like it knew that it was making people autistic. And it's almost like it prepared the way for these autistic people to enter the workforce. It's almost like that's the case. Right. Um, yeah, and so they're going to have to adapt to that. Um, when realistically, what it is the old lady. She physically does the work. She's out there doing the lawn care for 38 years. She's the heart and soul of the business. Well, she's aging out of that. She's not going to be physically capable of that, for much longer. And the amphetamines, that train, that's going to end at some point, right? That's how long she's been burning that candle at both ends. Who even knows? And I feel bad for these ladies. And I wish I'd made notes because I came up with some quotable quote around, America is, two boomer old ladies on amphetamines, doing such and such, right? Like this is America, you know. America is, a 60-year-old lady in your local community that's been on, her and her right hand, gal pal, uh, slash potential lover. It's unclear. Not an actual, no romantic partner, no male, not even a mention of an ex-husband, nothing in the picture, right? The Just the complete death of the man, right? The actual, man, that's gone, right? And then we've got chubby Gen Z, half autistic people, looking at their phones, um, you know, trying to cut yards here, and but with boomers who won't train them properly, who won't just on day one say, okay, I'm going to go show you what I expect this yard to look like when we're done. And not every yard is the same, by the way, autistic Gen Zer. But see, here's the trap: is the boomer doesn't tell them that, and they have no frame of reference. So if you show the autistic person, here's how I expect it done, they think that's how you need it done every single time, right? And I think a lot of these boomers don't understand the messages that they're sending, right? It's fascinating. And then, and I've observed this in my own life in the last several years, just because with my own undiagnosed fake autism, and just I seem to come across as some like young, youthful person in spite of my age, and I sort of get treated like a kid in some ways. It's a certain naivete on the part of some of our neurodivergent folks, right? A bit of a gullibility, right? Um, but it's a gullibility combined with a sharp, very sharp analytical mind but it doesn't analyze until later, right? It's like, yeah, when you're in the moment with me, somebody can get the wrong idea that I'm quite gullible. The problem is the next time we interact, I will have perfectly analyzed and assessed exactly what happened on the prior encounter. I will be moving forward with the new information, right? And pretty soon I'm talking to the boss like on a job, like as if I'm their boss, right? They're like, "Well, where did this come from? This is crazy." Uh, but I don't want to get into too many different topics. But yeah, it's fascinating. But you know, and here's what I mean by, and the reason I bring all of this up, and this is a long way around to make a point, is that part of the way uh, Mike was able to convey this idea to these ladies was he said the market makes these choices, and he's referring to the labor market. So what he's saying is, hey, ladies, you have a business, and your business is now accessing the Gen Z labor market almost entirely exclusively. Now, again, I think they would be better trying to find some gals who will mow the yards. But in their mind, in the boomer mind, well, that's girls don't mow yards. It's like, yeah, well, I guarantee you they could find some Gen Z gals that would happily go mow the yards and probably do a way better job, right? And wouldn't put up with half a second of this foolishness of the guilt and shame and just being expected to fucking read minds. I think the Gen Z women would be way better at where the fellas are just gonna do a half a day and be like, this is crazy, and go home and just never come back, right? Like, what is this? What is this? And they're all living with mommy and daddy anyway. So you can't really, the olden days of, oh my God, I have to have, now we have a 20-year-old here who's desperate enough to mow these yards, and they have to have this job because they got married a year ago and there's a baby on the way. Like, that shit's over, folks. Well, the boomer can't relate to this world. They can't relate to these, because in the boomer mind, the 20-year-old fella showing up, you know, probably was in the same situation as when I was 20 or when the boomer lady was 20. And this is a form of intelligence, and this is neuroplasticity. And this is part of the reason I come across so youthful, right? Is that I do keep up with the times as they change. I don't attempt to control and force, right? Although I'm sure I do. Show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. I'm sure I have done, but to me, it's a fool's errand to try to continue to enforce all of these outdated things. And I noticed very early on, if I would become sort of forceful or angry or aggressive, and I don't mean physically aggressive, but just, in the olden days, behaviors and communication, ways of communicating that would sort of, like the lady at the bank, like hop to go fix this, but not said that way, but that's a communication style, like, chop, chop. I'm here. I'm the customer. You're here. The bank is employing you to keep me happy on some level. So, and while recognizing, okay, lady, it's not your fault. I'm not going to take it out on her. Right. But, I still expect this to be resolved, to my satisfaction more or less immediately, which it was, but what I'm not going to do is carry that for the rest of my life. As soon as I realize, oh, things have changed, it's no longer this way. Right. And so what I've recognized with Gen Z and maybe some of the younger, or some of the millennials is, they don't process this. I can behave, the ways that, the methods that were used to motivate me as a young person, right? They simply don't process this. I mean, it just washes past them. It just in one ear and out the other. It's not like it annoys them or frustrates them or angers them, and they're Zen Buddhists and they know how to control it. That just doesn't affect them, right? They're not they just don't operate on those levels. And again, there's always exceptions to everything. I'm sure I'm wrong at times. I'm speaking very broadly and generally, but yeah, there's always exceptions. But and I'm sure we can go somewhere somewhere in Mississippi where 99% of the population was born in that county and will never leave it. That I'm sure it's still the olden times, right? Because I remember I heard somebody referencing, some area of Mexico or whatever, the median household income is like $18,000, and then immediately the content creators like, yeah, you can't find any place comparable in the United States. And I'm like, oh, I can absolutely take you to probably Arkansas, but I can absolutely take you to somewhere in Mississippi. I can find a county in Mississippi right now where the median household income is absolutely $18,000. And those places do exist. And in an American's mind, like, that's not even possible, right? It's like, what are you talking about? People in America living on the same amount of money that people in Mexico are living on? Yeah, it's called the Mississippi River Delta, right? It's called fucking nowhere near an interstate in some tiny county in Mississippi where nobody goes anywhere. They're born there, they die there, they don't leave, right? Yeah, absolutely. This is a thing, folks. Yeah, fascinating. But the idea of a market, so labor as a market, and Mike is like, hey, the labor market has changed. Gen Z is not going to work for you if you micromanage Gen Z. And then, the boomer owner lady, she, to her credit, said, wow, I'm glad I didn't realize that we were micromanagers. And her and her right hand were both like, hey, we didn't even realize it. But, to their credit, they were able to accept it. And Mike's videos is mostly men, right? It's almost all men running businesses with, maybe there's a wife somewhere, or there's a woman, doing the books, in a high, if it's a larger company, in positions of authority, but it's almost always male leadership, also, depressed, right? Lacking focus, lacking energy. Not all of them, but a lot of them, they've only called in Mike Andes because, it's finally to the point where they can't borrow any more money to keep their business running. They can't, it's just a last resort. Versus it's interesting. The first time I've seen a woman-owned business it's a 38-year-old successful business. That's the longest business I know of that he's ever gone to. And this woman has plenty of cash flow. right? A lot of these businesses are male owned and operated that Mike goes to, and they have less than 1 month's revenue in the bank, right? Some of them have like $3,000 in the bank, right? And Mike's like basically like, hey, that's effectively the same as $0. And he shows up and they're like, yeah, well, we managed to make payroll last week, right? And then it's interesting to see these type A women who are they're so on top of it, they're calling Mike Andes in, like they're already seeing the writing on the wall. And meanwhile, the owner could probably just retire, and she's, at an age where it would be appropriate. And she's wanting to keep the thing going, with nobody to pass it on to, I don't believe, just she just thinks it's a good business who serves, customers that she personally cares about, right? And then so she wants to keep the thing moving, right? And that's supposed to be part of what America, that's a lot of what people historically believed America was. And it's like, yeah, okay. If people believed that's what America was, and if Americans wanted to protect and honor that, well, the moment Americans see like the '90s, NAFTA, outsourcing jobs, Ross Perot's giant sucking sound, and this is where I'm going to kind of tie it into politics. The moment all of that writing is on the wall, that's when Americans have to say, okay, call in the cavalry, call in whatever the version of Mike Andes is to address, the chaos that, all of these changes is about to cause, right? And this is something to be protected. Now, what I'm speaking of specifically is to not allow corporations to come into the state, right? State of whatever, wherever this was, don't allow corporations to take over, for example, the state of Alabama. So that, earlier this year, early on in the deportation immigrant, illegal hype, they interviewed some dumbos out in Alabama, these poor folks, low class white people, white trash people, and who, because whoever the journalists were wanted to intentionally go find some people that would make inflammatory statements and just ignorant statements and all of this, and prejudicial statements. And they were complaining and about foreigners taking our jobs type shit. And I'm just watching this and I'm like, hey, that's your fault, Alabamans. And these Alabamans are confused as to why, more or less, why are these people allowed to come here and do these jobs, basically? Well, that's because corporations must have access to labor at the price of their choosing. And Alabama chose that because Alabamans voted with their feet and said, we prefer corporations. The reason Alabama is the way Alabama is, or the reason Arkansas is the way Arkansas is because the people who live there, instead of protecting and honoring and upholding local businesses, said, oh, no, we prefer corporations. We prefer Walmart. We prefer Starbucks. We prefer all of these things. And so, surprise, surprise, corporations over a period of however many years they did what corporations do, which is they continue to consolidate, grow larger and larger and larger. This is what they do, right? More and more consolidation, more and more takeover. And lest we forget, the Walmart Supercenter, and me being from Arkansas, where Walmart is headquartered, whether this is true or not, I have no idea, but in Walmart lore is the idea that the Walmart Corporation wanted to do the supercenter concept all across the United States. They wanted to begin that far earlier than they did, but they had to wait for Sam Walton to pass away because he was not allowing them to, more or less, understanding what the Walmart supercenters all across the nation would do to America. And again, this may be apocryphal. This may not have ever even happened, but that's how the mythology is portrayed, right? I doubt Sam Walton gave a flying fuck. Who knows? But that's the idea, is that he was holding it back, and then he passed away, and then it was all systems go on the Walmart Supercenter, right? Because even in Arkansas, as a child, I remember my first memories of big box stores was Kmart was king in my town, and then slowly but surely Walmart took that over. but it took a while, right? Kmart was the first choice, and then Walmart, the Walmart, not the original discount store. If anybody remembers the actual old school Walmart discount store, and I don't mean like the Ben Franklin's or the Five and Dimes or whatever the fuck that was, but then they had sort of an intermediate thing, and this was probably during the time in which Sam Walton was not allowing, and what it was Sam Walton just wasn't letting them go full integration with grocery in the supercenters yet. Now I'm sure they were doing some of them, right? And that was the original super Walmarts, the idea of a super Walmart, right? Or Walmart Supercenter. If you remember early on, a lot of people would call it Super Walmart. It was such a new thing, and typically what that meant was, oh, it's because by then, the regular Walmarts without groceries had grown to a certain size. So the super Walmart was basically a regular Walmart, but had the full size grocery store just sort of tacked onto, one side of the building or the other. If anybody remembers all of this. And so my town, got sort of that intermediate step, which it was like, kind of a super center, but no, they sold some food items, but it did not have the full grocery, right? And even that was at the time, Kmart was still the preference. Just you know, so folks know where we're at on the big box progression, right? And and I do remember when I went to college, Food for Less was a big grocery chain, and Walmart had bought them out. And, somewhere in there, that was probably after, I don't remember when Sam Walton died, but, I think that was part of Walmart, uh, going into the full supercenter concept with the attached grocery. And then there's still, to this day, every once in a while, I will find a Food for Less somewhere in a shopping center that also contains a Walmart that does not have the grocery, because probably just the local area, and that's usually more of a West Coast thing, probably the local area just won't allow them to do the full supercenter with the grocery, if that makes sense. So as much as the middle of the country people are critical of the West Coasters, right? It's not all bad. Some of this is on the West Coast, the people have at least over time done certain things to sort of insulate corporations, and especially retail and big box, from just taking everything over, right? Um, but states like Arkansas, Alabama, the middle part of the country is just like, hey, come on down, you know. And some of it is probably that just backwards yokel hick, phenomenon of just, again, the people that have never left the county. It's like, hey, there's just somebody's going to come here and build a big shiny building, come on down, and then the people get hooked on the big box, corporatism. And well, yeah, now there's no mom and pops. The mom and pops are now gone. And then what's happened in some areas, uh, and some of this was happening pre-pandemic, uh, pre-fake pandemic. At this point, it doesn't even matter. Pandemic and fake pandemic, pretty much same fucking. What's the difference at this point? You got normies talking about timelines, for fuck's sakes. And what's the difference? But so you've had some. If you've ever seen in the middle part of the country, there's a lot of towns that, there's Dollar Generals everywhere, and then some of these towns have had like a grocery store that was either just completely independent one-off grocery store, or maybe some version of a regional or like a local chain, or just some guy ended up becoming, accruing enough money to have maybe 3 or 4 independent stores in the area. So then, and that's the entirety of what's there, really. And you got country stores, convenience stores. We call them country stores where I'm from. Maybe they sell food or whatever, hot food, fried food, and some grocery items. And then like a Dollar General, and maybe a McDonald's, maybe just a Sonic, depending on where we're at, Sonic drive-through, drive-in. And then, well, Walmart not putting a super center in. See, and this is what corporations do. And this is the competition as a sin part of corporations. Because Walmart don't give a flying fuck about the people who live in this whatever bumfuck area. Let's just call it bumfuck. So the town I'm describing is called bumfuck. Well, Walmart, the corporation, lacks the ability to give a flying fuck. It can't care about bumfuck, but it cares about business at the level of competition is a sin, meaning it's all collusion and collaboration at the highest levels, right? All the big boys don't compete against each other, provably, right? But they compete against all the smaller fellas, meaning the local grocer. The way capitalism operates, the way business operates is, you know, even though the little grocer's not a threat, practically speaking, to gigantic Walmart, Walmart still views everything as a potential threat. This is how business works. And so if it's to Walmart's corporate advantage to put the local grocer out of business, that's what they're going to do, right? Now, here's how it becomes quite pernicious, right? I would say diabolical, but apparently that's somehow become a popular term. I've been saying it my whole life, but this is where things become quite evil. Is well, Walmart, they don't build a super center there. Well, why don't they build a super center there? Because the reason why there's no super center there is because that area cannot support a super center. Well, why would Walmart build a super center there just to put the local grocer out of business when they can't make money? And people say, well, why would they put something there if it's not economically viable? Well, to put the grocer out of business, but they're not going to do that with a super center. So what they've taken to doing in the last however many years is the neighborhood market concept. And I remember when that was new. And one thing about being from Arkansas gets everything Walmart related. It always happens first in Arkansas. So we get all the new innovations are always in Arkansas first. And so same thing with Walmart neighborhood market, right? And then some failed concepts is like there's Walmart convenience stores, for example, in parts of Arkansas. And I've never seen one anywhere else. It's, probably just something that they were fucking around with and just never caught on, right? And so they put a neighborhood market knowing it's going to put this guy out of business. And then after he goes out of business, fucking the neighborhood market shuts down. So they went in there, built a brand new building, put in a neighborhood market solely to put the local guy out of business, and then left like a year later. And they've done this repeatedly, right? Like strategically and systematically. Like this is what corporations do to the people on purpose, right? And when a corporate executive's paycheck and bonus depends upon him or her taking these actions, and knows for a fact, well, even if this is the moral hazard that corporations introduce into society is, even if the executives who undertake the actions consider it to not be a moral action, they still take the action that they themselves consider to be immoral, and it's rationalized because they say, well, if I refuse, the corporation will replace me with a different executive who will happily do what the corporation demands of them, and then I won't have this job. Maybe I won't be able to support my family and meet my financial goals and my career goals quite as readily. So they just go ahead and do what's expected of them, right? And this is business. This is what Americans historically have upheld above all, is this idea of American exceptionalism via business, you know, uh, competition and a certain size of economy, affluence, consumerism as national religion, and all of these things. And, in a vacuum, if I was a disembodied being just floating around somewhere, but, at least for the purposes of the discussion, had a human consciousness and a human thought process, and if all of this could be conveyed to me in a vacuum, these accurately describing American society, I would not choose to come here. and say, okay, Benton, here's your opportunity to go to America in this realm called Earth and be in a human body with a human consciousness and a human thought process. And then this is the society that you will be living in as and performing as Benton with this history, born into this family, these circumstances, and on and on and on. I would have been like, what else you got? What else you got? Because that does not sound appealing to me, right? Meanwhile, what's expected, and this is, I'm going to continue to hammer these points home, what's expected of the spiritually perfected child leaves its mother's womb spiritually perfected, right? Of Christ in some form, right? Or a Christ-like, right? And is then sacrificed to industrial / post-industrial society by its parents and offered up, said, here, have at it, Moloch, right? Just we give our greatest wealth up to corporations in the form of the spiritually perfect innocent youth. Here, have at them. Walmart, have at them. Amazon, have at them. McDonald's, Starbucks, banks, financial institutions, have your way with them. Run a train on them. Run right through them like you ran right through us, right? And I'm 50 this summer. And the royal we, and I shouldn't even say that. I don't really even necessarily include myself in this, but folks my age and older are ran through. The system has ran through them so much, has pulled so many trains on them for so long that all people my age and older know how to do is behave as if they enjoy it. I mean, for real. And then to treat the youth with confusion and disrespect because the youth won't accept guilt and shame as motivators to lie down with the system to be ran through and gangbanged. And I apologize for using this sort of imagery and speaking this way, but it's appropriate. I mean, it's pertaining, right? Sometimes I see in the YouTube comments, especially when it comes to homeless people or just, poor folks in general, or just the idea of people on disability and this and that. And oh, well, this person in this video they look like they could work. And when I do post in the comments, I've taken to saying, well, but it's like some either homeless person or like borderline, somebody on the fringes of society. And I'm like, hey, would you want to work side by side with this person? Like, do you want this person at your job? Somebody could just take them to work, bring a homeless person to work day, right? But again, the system has to attack the individual. The system, right? It chooses to, first it sees, well, what will these people internalize, right? Can we spiritually attack the homeless person and have them internalize these notions? Because maybe they will go get a job. It's like, yeah, maybe they already have one. Lots of homeless people have jobs. Number one. Number two, I can tell you from my personal experience, a job is not a path out of homelessness, at least not anywhere in probably the first year, right? And remember, the middle part of the country, effectively speaking, does not have services to get homeless people into housing unless the homeless person is willing and able to put themselves through some sort of Christian-based program, especially males, right? Women, it may be a little different, where they're going to be expected to worship Jesus in the way that this group of people worships Jesus. And, let's just say, if I have some concept of my own worship within myself, not a worship of myself, but worshiping within myself, oh no, they're going to need me in order to clean me up and to, bless me into their society at the level of, employment and having a place to live. No, I'm going to need to worship Jesus the way they worship Jesus. Right. Well, this is fucking sick, man. This is the opposite of tolerance, right? This is the opposite of the teachings of Jesus, as far as I can tell. It's like the inverse Jesus. What is this? So yeah, and I would like to have access to funds just to do sort of social experiments that could be documentaries or YouTube videos. It's just my thing is I wouldn't ever give a fuck if the things got views or made money, or I just wouldn't care. To me, artistically, I would do it because I think it's interesting, but just go find some fucking homeless people and film them every day and the ones that are capable and willing and able to get employment, and just watch what happens, right? When they go get a job, you'll see things like, from my own experience, oh, here's Benton taking the train to his first day of training at a call center for NikeStore.com, a third party, company, an intermediary. Because certainly Nike doesn't want to employ me, right? But this third party contracted with Nike, and here's Benton on his first day in training, and from day one until I received my first full paycheck, 2 weeks paycheck with 80 hours on it, was 30 motherfucking days on the calendar. 30 calendar days. Well, what the hell is a homeless person with no money who just got a job? What the fuck are they supposed to do for 30 days? Now, people might say, well, they're supposed to do what they did for the past 30 days. Yeah, except they didn't have to spend all day getting to the job. Well, first making themselves presentable for the job, getting to the job, 45-minute train ride, I believe, 30 to 45-minute train ride in my case, right? Do the job, go back to the homeless services and do whatever needs to be done, and then sleep outside or sleep in a homeless shelter or sleep on a sidewalk, as I did, and then wake up the next morning and do it all over again and repeat that process 30 times, right? Are you crazy? Now, if we had a society, now I was able to do it, but it was not a path out of homelessness. I'm just talking about, okay, how do I survive for 30 days to get to this money? Meanwhile, yeah, I did get a partial check. My first check was just enough money to pay for the train rides, the train tickets. It somehow, call it God, call it whatever, the universe. It was just enough money, for me to buy the train tickets, to get to work. So, in a society that actually cared about its, in a proper society that had homeless people who were willing to work a job, there would probably be programs or some mechanism where it's like, okay, a business is willing to hire homeless people. We're going to incentivize them to hire these homeless people, and we're going to make it a requirement that they must begin to pay the homeless people day one, but then also at least a portion of money. But then there's also, it's a carrot and a stick approach of, oh, well, what if we just start paying them money right away? Well, they might not come to work. Yeah, you're right. Some of them, if you give them $40 today, they're not coming to work tomorrow. Guess what? They're also not going to make it the full 30 days anyway. What's the difference? I would say it's better to find out. Meanwhile, it's 2 weeks paid training. You might want to find out day one that they're not going to just milk your 2 weeks of training and never actually do the job, right? See what I'm saying? Again, this would be in a society in a vacuum, meaning without all of these artificial or alien forces placed upon it, in a society that could, and also if humankind was capable, which it's not, but were humankind capable of creating and operating systems free of, corruption, right? This could all be managed and operated properly, but it can't be. And this is why the system is indefensible. It's not defensible because the system is only able to operate and propagate in ways that benefit and perpetuate and reinforce and strengthen the system. And that's the more time within delusion, right? The more time progresses, on a progression, the more, and business has to continue to grow. The GDP has to continue to expand. The size of the economy has to continue to expand. Well, then the more that's achieved by the people having lower standards of living, less free time, and are expected to tolerate worse conditions, right? So that the jobs themselves become less desirable, the the working environment becomes less desirable, and then, as we see today, the money buys far less than it did before. And I can't remember the time frame, but one of these channels I listened to did a breakdown of, in the past, apparently it wasn't that long ago, that if you took the average or the median hourly wage in this country, and they don't bother to say what that is, because remember, gold doesn't change in value. When people say, "Oh, gold went up, gold went down," gold stays the same. That's the value of gold. It's the same no matter what. The USD goes up and down in relation to the gold, not the other way around. So when you hear people say, "Oh, gold's at an all-time high," or "Gold's this," or "Gold's that," no, that's not the case. The money is being measured and assessed differently in relation to gold, which doesn't fluctuate. See, gold stays the same. The purchase, what you can trade the gold for, doesn't change. The gold's worth what the gold's worth. That's just what it is. It doesn't change. Now, I'm sure some really smart person will debunk that, but of practically speaking. So he's talking about 1 hour in the past, and I don't think I forgot the time frame, but it wasn't that long ago. Let's just say in the 90s, or let's just say late 90s, early 2000s, or whatever. Um, that one median hour of work bought 0.06 ounces of gold, and it now buys 0.01 ounces of gold, meaning the workers expected to do more, right? A better job, right? More is expected of the worker. It's never less over time. This idea that, oh, people's lives are going to get easier. No, that they're going to get harder if they're just a regular working person, right? So more is expected, more flexibility. They're expected to tolerate things that never would have been expected in the past. And then simultaneously, for money, for a wage that doesn't really buy anything, right? When you're talking about 1 hour purchasing 0.06 ounces of gold, well, that at least sounds like something. 0.01, now we're getting fairly close to nothing, right? So, yeah, so you're telling me now that the market, right, that the financial markets, the labor market, corporations, and all of this, they now, my labor, if I want to just go work, at the median wage, that 1 hour of my labor, the system is telling me that it doesn't value it. It values it almost as low as possible. It basically is like, hey, we're almost on the precipice of, we don't value your labor at all, right? And this is probably the way things are going. And remember, if the corporation could get you to work for free and was legally able, other than an internship, I'm not talking about internships, I'm talking about just a common worker at a McDonald's or whatever, or a Walmart supercenter. The corporation's preference is that the person shows up and does the work and doesn't have to be paid anything. That's the preference. The preference is always to pay the lowest amount possible, and up to and including zero. And eventually, when you have a psychologically enslaved populace, is it really impossible, uh, with the way America has become, and I would say it has been the whole time, the way America is, why wouldn't there be slave labor, some version of slave labor? I mean, there already is through the prison system, but, why not? And Trump's already, and again, it's not about Trump, the government, right? The government, a mouthpiece of the government has already openly talked about just more or less rounding up the fringes of society, putting them in camps and forcing them to work, right? So why wouldn't it happen? And I'm approaching this from, this is the system of things that people want to defend, especially in the so-called truth community. It's like, I'm pulling my hair out, metaphorically, to some extent, because, my thing is like, hey, you know, I understand that people have, I'm not a huge fan of this this saying, but this vernacular, but they've portaled, if in fact this is a heaven or hell realm manifesting as a hell realm, it certainly seems to be, you know, then if this is functioning as hell realm, this idea of portaling souls to hell realm, right? If that's really a thing, well, I've never done that I'm aware of. Har har har. You know, if I have any kids, I don't know about it, and then most likely I don't. But um, so I understand these folks in the so-called truth community who've potentially, perhaps, portaled souls to hell. Well, now they're incentivized and probably have to in some way defend an indefensible society. This is indefensible. Like just my descriptions of markets and the media, what the median uh you know wage, the median hourly wage would buy. And you could say till you're blue in the face, oh well, you're not supposed to, these low level jobs were never intended to be a living wage, right? Oh, it's supposed to be for high school kids and kids in college. Listen, that's the way it used to be. That doesn't mean that it's a progression. It's not crystalline. It's not static. If that's how things were when I was entering the labor market in the early 1990s, right? To some extent, the late 80s, but that was only working for my father, right? Well, yeah, I was technically working in the late 80s for my father. And now that I think about it, and maybe by the mid 80s, but that doesn't even matter. I don't want to get sidetracked. And that was more of the notion of, but then there were some adults in these lower level jobs, and maybe they were special or slow, or they were able to live on a very low income, and whatever that is. But see, that was 1992, and corporations hadn't taken over the state of Arkansas. Corporations hadn't taken over middle America. They hadn't taken over Alabama yet. So yeah, it was okay to approach things that way. Well, it's 2025, it's 35 years later or whatever, and corporations have taken over everything. And as all of these mom and pops have been driven out of business, right? And a lot of these businesses that, maybe the high school job, right, was a stepping stone to the next step, to the next step, to the next step. Well, those intermediaries, they're no longer steps to anything. It's just a whole country of McJobs, right? Every job is McDonald's now, right? And I'm repeating something that is said on one of my favorite channels, Millennial Steam, right? But then we still have the old school boomer notion of hell, you're not supposed to stay in that job anyway. And then the person in that job is like, yo, I graduated with a master's degree fucking last week. This is the only job I can find. Like, what are you talking about? And again, we're attempting to gaslight, and society's gaslighting and trying to get these people to internalize notions. So society gaslights these people into, hey man, go get a degree or two or three and you're guaranteed a job, right? People still parrot this to this day. And I still see this as if just, hey, you got the piece of paper. Now your job, now the red carpet's rolled out. Man, it hasn't been that way for a long ass time in this country. So we've had probably 20 years of of increasing competition amongst educated people for white collar jobs, or even, you know, retail jobs, potentially retail management, perhaps. Increased competition for these jobs. And then again, this idea of, oh, well, Gen Z doesn't want to work, or millennial, whatever. It's like, yeah, Gen Z's now old enough. They're graduating college. They've been word of mouthed and common sensed and conventional wisdomed into, hey, go get your piece of paper and your job magically appears. Because, you know, again, the word of mouthing of everything, the idea of common sense, so-called conventional wisdom, you know. And I would say folks are better off not listening to any of this nonsense. So the same bozo who says, "Yeah, we'll get your piece of paper, and of course you're just guaranteed a job." That's the same bozo who runs into the person with the piece of paper at Kroger and is scratching their head like, "Hey, these are supposed to be jobs for teenagers. What's going on here? Why are you still here 5 years later?" And the guy's looking like, "Hey, man, like I don't know. I graduated with, you know, I did everything the word of mouth told me to do, and I'm working at. You tell me, I'm working at motherfucking Kroger. Like I'm as confused as you are, right?" But remember, the system and other humans are the first line of defending the indefensible system is, oh, well, let's see if we can gaslight and attack and just yo fault the person working at Kroger. Meanwhile, if it's Gen Z and mommy and daddy is happy to let them stay there, and mommy and daddy are millennials who, have they see the writing on the wall, and they're like also helicopter parents. They've raised their kid in the self-esteem era, self-esteem era after self-esteem era, right? Their kids, they're not going to send little Johnny and Susie off to get treated like garbage at the Kroger unless, you know, Johnny or Susie, gives it a try, right? They're trying to move out of the house potentially. Meanwhile, Kroger doesn't pay enough for Johnny and Susie to move out of the house. Now, the parents can say, okay, we will supplement your income, meaning, okay, Johnny or Susie, go work full time at Kroger, which is now 30 hours because the corporation's not going to pay any benefits that it doesn't have to. So go work your 28 to 32 hours a week at Kroger and make just enough money to have an apartment, a studio apartment. And then, mommy and daddy will pay the other half of whatever it costs these people to live. And remember, a lot of these folks have $20,000 to $150,000 in college loan, college debt. And people are like, "Oh, this is crazy. Well, who would do that?" I'll tell you who would do that. An American citizen who doesn't know any better than to go by the conventional wisdom and the word of mouth and the common sense, which is there's no such thing as common sense. But people still run around talking about common sense. And it's almost always a boomer that I hear that shit from, or Gen X. Oh, well, common sense. Fuck you, right? What do you mean common sense? Common sense is everybody working at Kroger on the front lines who speaks the motherfucking language has is as highly educated, as the professional that they're assisting in the store. The person that makes $250,000, the person helping them at the Kroger might have a higher level of education, right? Defend that society. But oh yeah, but it has to be but the boomer says, well, if they would have just worked a little harder, well, maybe they should have studied harder in high school. Then they could have got into a better college, and maybe they should have made better grades in the college, and then they could have got a job out of college, right? There's no end to the spiritual attacks and the gaslighting. It's never the system's fault to these people. And I got no time in my life for that. It's disgusting. And every once in a while, I check in on a channel in the so-called truth community just to kind of see what's going on. And here I see some bozo, right? Some unnamed bozo that some of you perhaps could be familiar with in the comments of another bozo's channel, right? A well-known content creator in the space, as I like to say. And I see bozo number one and bozo number two's comments, and here's bozo number one just happily defending the indefensible system, right? And gaslighting bozo number two as if the source of all of bozo number two's problems is that bozo number two is just more or less refusing to pull himself up by his bootstrap. But not necessarily a pulling up, not necessarily specifically that, just a, hey man, if you would conform and if you would have done all of these things in the past a little bit better, if you'd been a little bit better. No, fuck that. Fuck you. Again, why would I ever agree to come to this place? And if I don't do the absolute bleeding edge maximum of my abilities, right, in the systems of man that are never free from corruption. So the expectation is I'm going to allow myself to be run through a gauntlet or run the gamut of all of these corrupt, by inherently corrupt systems of man, and I'm going to just mind, body, and spirit. I'm going to put 120% of my blood, sweat, tears, resources, intelligence, efforts, right, um, into making something of myself in a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. And anything other than smashing success, I will receive total blame. That's this place. That's not defensible, folks. In a proper society, there would be a place for these people. And this really struck me, and I've used this example before about how, again, these were not, this was the societies of the past in America. This was what it was still Moloch's machine. This is what, so this was not, oh, the people back then were better. But so I'm only referencing a less degenerated version of people. These were still degenerated, right, within these corrupt systems. So I'm not black and whiting, and I'm not, putting down present society and saying, oh, well, it was great in the past, because it wasn't. But I found a book in the library. It was like a coffee table book, or coffee table book about living rooms throughout history. So it was pictures of people's living rooms. When there was one from the 1800s, and I'm reading, I'm looking at a couple of different pictures, big spread, and I'm reading the captions, and there was a large fireplace, but then off to the side was like a smaller fireplace. And they're like, yeah, the large fireplace, that was the main fireplace for the house. And then the smaller fireplace was built for a member of the family who refused to have anything to do with the rest of the family. Now let that sink in. So this person presumably either was unable to, maybe they were some version of neurodivergent. They either lacked the ability to interface with their fellow humans in the household, or they just chose not to for whatever. I don't know. I wasn't there. And this could all be fake, but I choose to accept it as real. This seems like what less degenerate people would do. Instead of gaslighting and saying, well, hey, family member, if you would do better, if you weren't so failed, and again, apologies for the you. I'm slowly but surely training myself out of this, but if they weren't so bad, right? It's basically the family saying it. Well, if pointing the finger and saying, well, yeah, if they weren't so bad, then they wouldn't be over there shivering, because they would have had to have proven that this is how, apparently they so strongly believed in not having anything to do with the family, that when the nights, or when the really cold weather hit, right, we're getting sub-zero, and so much so that the family is moving closer and closer and closer to the main fireplace, and that was the only fireplace. Presumably the family member who wouldn't have anything to do with the rest of them proved it over time by shivering in the corner to some extent, so much so that they finally said, fuck it, we're building this bozo their own damn uh uh their own hearth, or whatever, their own fireplace, and we're going to make sure it's far enough away from the main one to where they'll actually use it, right? Well, see, society could do its own version of that, but not a corporatized society. Corporate society can't do that. Corporate society must gaslight the person who refuses to have anything to do with the family, and spiritually attack them, and and bring all power and pressure to heal against them, to bring that, to see, will they conform, right? Will they conform? That's sick, and that's twisted, and that can't ever be love. Actual love is, well, I guess we're building them a fucking fireplace because we can't just continue to watch them shiver every winter. That's what love builds them, a fireplace, right? That's what love does. What love never does is attack and gaslight and spiritually come at them in some type of way as if it's their own lack. Now, are they responsible for where they are in life because of their decisions? And yeah, of course, I'm not removing responsibility from the matter. I'm only addressing the ways in which society approaches them, right? And meanwhile, every man for himself, right? And basically, the commenter was like, hey, more or less like, you're still here, uh you know uh interfacing with these same people on the internet when you could be doing these other things, right? Oh, you mean like, you know uh going off into an indefensible society? Like, I see why people are wanting to remove themselves from these things, right? Meanwhile, people do have personalities that respond to, and if I keep continuing about it, it'll become obvious what I'm talking about. So I'll just break that off there. I don't want to make it too obvious what I'm talking about, because I'm not trying to make it a personal thing at all. It's just something I found interesting. It's like, but then see, I tie it into, when I see this behavior, it's almost always somebody who has children and is still raising children, not people who've raised their children and then now they've moved on to another phase of their life. I'm talking about people who are still raising children. That seems to be the people who must, no matter what, defend the system. Because, and it makes sense. Like, how are they going to, you know, sacrifice their own greatest value, supposedly, to Moloch's machine and and send them off into, okay, well, now go find your way in Moloch's machine, right? We've raised you up, and we've given you whatever resources we've given you. Now off you go to serve Moloch's machine. And again, I can't get too much more specific because I'm not even interested in attacking or bringing people down, or it's not about that. It's about, you know I have been gaslit and attacked spiritually, uh, based on these notions, and it's bullshit. And righteously, I will call it out. Righteously, I will say, absolutely not. This does not pertain to me. This has nothing to do with me. The fact that the fact that I've proven that I can go get a job and I can work, and then, but if it doesn't work for me, why would I do it in the first place? Because that's how a corporation looks at things. The corporation says, before Amazon does something, I'm sure it asks itself, well, how does this benefit Amazon? And if it doesn't benefit Amazon, why would it do it? If there's no benefit to me to accessing employment, why in the fuck would I access employment? So what we've had in America is, we've had at least 20 years now of people exiting the workforce. And this is why people think the unemployment rate, this is part of the reason people think the unemployment rate is 4.5% or whatever it is. Oh, unemployment's low. Yeah, it's low because I don't count as unemployed because I'm not actively seeking work. Therefore, I'm just not in the workforce. And there's millions of people. It's called the labor workforce participation rate. And you can go look at it on a chart. It's like, wow, that sure has declined over time. Yeah, because it's not socially acceptable to just say, hey, within Moloch's machine, say, hey, well, if the job doesn't benefit me, why would I show up to do the job? Because remember, it's a moral imperative. Middle America folks, boomers, right? Gen X, even some of these millennials, middle America millennials, no, it's a moral imperative. We wake up in the morning, we go off to work, whether that's in our own fields or the neighbor's field or the sharecropping fields, or we go off to the local paper mill, or we go off to the local prison, or whatever's local, we go there and we work. It's like, yeah, that's what I used to do, right up until it no longer served me to do that. Because what's the most important part in this equation, folks? It's me. But now we have, remember, in a very selfish me first, self-centered society, a narcissistic society, America, well, we still have these cultural, outdated notions of Christianity, Puritanism, morality tied to toil, right? As if I'm somehow less moral because today I did not wake up in the morning and hi ho, it's off to work I go, right? Now I'm somehow going to be treated as if I'm morally inferior. Where did Jesus work? Oh, Jesus was a carpenter. Bullshit. There's no talk in the Bible of Jesus swinging a hammer as an adult. There's talk of carpentry when he was a boy. Just like I was sweeping up the parking lot or weed eating the property at Big Jim's convenience store in 1988 or 1989. That weren't up to me. I was a minor child, folks. So whatever hammer Jesus might have swung as a minor child, I don't give a fuck. So you can shove, not you. See, I'm doing it again. I'm getting worked up. You know, that's out the window as far as I'm concerned. So what we know of Jesus in the Bible is the man did not work a job. So I guess Jesus was morally degenerate. I guess Jesus was morally inferior because in the biblical story of Jesus, he woke up every day and not one of them days did he go off to work. So where was Jesus's morality? Come at me, Christians. I know all your little tricks. I know you better than you know yourselves, Christians. I know you better than you know yourselves at the level of what the system Christianity's ran through you. And again, I gotta just drop it because I can't even stop myself from directly addressing the listener. So my apologies. All I can do is repent by stating my intention to not do that to you anymore. All right. That's all I can do is seek repentance, right, and apologize by not doing it anymore. And I could tell something was. I could tell I stirred something up yesterday. I do these dead hangs, but I do like these modified hangs where I'm like, getting my back, like my middle back muscles involved. I'm, dealing with a lot of this less and less over time, but there's still some of this repressed trauma and stagnated negative energies. And so these dead hangs and these certain, you know, things I'm doing on a pull-up bar, I could tell yesterday, I was like, yeah, I really got in there deep. And so this morning I was like, yeah, something got stirred up in there. So that's what that is. Whatever that is coming out. So that's where this forcefulness and vociferousness is coming from. It's some of the repressed or the unprocessed negative, anger or whatever from the past seeking its outlet. And it's healing, right? That is healing. So thank you for participating in that. If anybody's still here, let me see. I don't know. I haven't looked at the screen in a while. I have things I could be doing right about now. Shout out to the chat. There's things I could be doing. I'm finding it not even motivationally. I'm just finding it less and less important because hypothetically, there's really nothing I have to do today. It's going to be in my best interest to do laundry at some point. It doesn't have to be today. By Monday, sure. Doesn't have to be done right now. So why bother if I've got things on my mind? Right. What a mess. And I'm not reading comments. And at this point, I don't even know if there's moderators. For all I know, I'm getting just flamed to hell and back in the live chat. I have no idea. It doesn't even matter. I mean, I'm going to check the battery levels, though. Let's see where we're at. Yeah, we're doing okay on the batteries. Man, that was quite the not quite a tirade, but borderline tirade. And so if a person pays attention to my descriptions of the system and the systems, that comprise the overall system, and I'm barely even scratching the surface. And then remember, if one keeps in mind that old Benton's analytical brain and very observant and into details and all of these things, and has studied these systems for decades now, that I'm walking around full time with all of that and 100 times more going on in my head all the time. None of this is defensible, folks. And I would say the fact that it seems to be happening, right, via delusion, the fact that all of this seems to be happening, well, that's no justification. Like, it doesn't validate the thing itself that well, yeah, it's happening. Okay. The fact that it's all happening, that doesn't mean that these phenomena, strictly speaking, are defensible simply because it's happening. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I understand it's seemingly happening. How is that a through line to, well, it has to be defensible since or what? The designs, the architecture of Antichrist and antithesis of thesis or proposition of the validity and authority inherent within the most super intelligent force and power of love and creation possible at the highest levels of vibrational frequency, a quickening spirit, or what I think some people believe they mean when they use the God word, right? Although some of them mean the other one. Uh, yeah, either way, I mean, this is not logical. It's simply not logical. And I think a lot of people, again, having placed themselves in the position to be, you know, aware of how difficult it is to defend these systems, and then presumably raising their children in ways to have some knowledge of the psyops and the bullshit and the world of lies aspects, right? And then you know just the perhaps the moral dilemma of, well, if I know it's a world of lies, do I just tell if I was to have children, do I tell them from day one, yeah, we're about to send you off, we're raising you to adulthood, and we're your parents and we love you, and we're going to send you off to a world of lies? Well, what loving parents would send their children off to a world of lies? And then back to the gaslighting and the spiritual attacks around boomers, and like, oh, look, Gen Z doesn't want to work. They're going to live it with mommy and daddy their whole lives. Yeah, their mom and dad probably loves them. Now, not across the board, but what sort of loving parents would send their kids off into this? Oh, fuck. I mean, for real. Knowing that it's a world of lies, right? Because not everybody, you know, I'm not sure all these millennials, I'm not sure that they quite have the levels of Stockholm syndrome and being ran through, as a result of being ran through by the system like Gen X and the boomers do. Gen X and boomers share in common, which is why effectively there's no such thing as, part of the reason why effectively there's no such thing as a Gen X online. It's all boomers, because both boomers and Gen X completely swallowed hook, line, and sinker, right? The lure of corporate America, right? Whereas millennials, by the time, you know, maybe the second half of the millennials were coming of age, and then, well, I don't even know. I don't have it. But either way, at some point, the millennials come along, and now the bloom's off the rose entirely, right? And I think weren't a lot of them hitting the job market right about the 0809 crisis, I think. I mean, I'd have to confirm that, but that seems right. Feels right. So they're still mind controlled. They're still indoctrinated, right? It's not like they're also psychologically enslaved, and mostly to the phones, right? But they're also psychologically enslaved. But see, it's a different flavor, or it's a different code that represents or makes up the psychological enslavement. It's like a computer program. Well, Gen Z and millennials are running different code than Gen X and boomers. Gen X and boomers are running the corporate America is the key to everything success wise, and it's never not the answer. Corporate America is never not, or even boomers and Gen X are finally starting to say, okay, well, what about the trades? Right. Well, the trades fucking suck. Okay. The trades sucking is the entire reason I got steered to college in the first place, when I should have been sent directly to the motherfucking Votech, whether I wanted to or not. Right. If anybody had a brain when I was a youngin', but they didn't. Right. Because they were heavily programmed. They were under psychological control. They did what the brainwashing told them to do. Right. Well, the brainwashing is telling them differently now. Okay. And Gen Z is fully aware of the corporate hellscape. You know. Now, will Gen Z go into the corporate hellscape? Absolutely, but only as the corporate hellscape serves them, at least based on what they value, which may not be something that I would consider to be worthy of value. Right. And it's all happening, and it's never going to be put back like it was. 1987's never coming back. 1993's never coming back. 1998 is never coming back. This corporate hellscape cannot be rolled back to 1998 levels, folks. It's not possible. You know, uh, brick and mortar still exists, for fuck's sakes. How many years removed is America from effectively no such thing as brick and mortar? Meaning you don't physically walk into the Walmart supercenter. That day will come, folks. They already don't want you in there. I mean, I can't. Me and another content creator have had multiple discussions about this. We independently, during the pandemic and after the pandemic, we were able to tell, oh, they don't want us in those stores. Versus pre-pandemic, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Hey, come on in. The water's fine. Come on down, buddy. We'll stock the shelves at 2:30 in the morning. And if you want to get in where you fit in and grab that can of beans, go for it. We'll work around each other. Now you go in there, and I'm treated as if I'm a nuisance, right? Brick and mortar's dead. It's dying. It's in the process of going away, never to return. And that's where you see Amazon's already beginning to do something that I talked about was going to happen, which is the self-driving with no human in the van is going to pull up to the curb, and a motherfucking robot is going to climb out of the van with your package, and it's going to drop it in the receptacle outside your home. They're doing that now. That's being put into place now. And what I have is a bunch of boomers who want to tell me why that will never happen. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you. There's been self-driving delivery vans with no human in the van driving around Bentonville, Arkansas for like 6 years now. So I don't. Well, right now, there's 18-wheelers with no human being in the rig hauling freight between Dallas and Houston right motherfucking now. But then if I mention these things, I get told why it can't ever possibly happen. And I'm like, well, they're doing it. What do you mean it can't happen? Like, what, when my most recent job was long haul truck driver, that shit's over with 2 to 5 years from now. And I mean, gone. Right. Now, again, if I want to go do ice road truckers and a fucking 120-mile-an-hour winds in Wyoming in a blizzard, right? Uh, that will always, I can't say always, but that will be available for some period of time. But I'm talking about the bargain, bottom of the barrel, dry van, truck driving. That shit's over with 2 to 5 years from now. Done. Done. The moment these big carriers are able to purchase and operate fully autonomous trucks, that's day one. That's what they're going to do. So proof of concept's happening right now, right? So the fact that it's already possible between Dallas and Houston, right? Well, now it's going to be between Houston and New Orleans or whatever, Houston and Baton Rouge or whatever. You know. So bit by bit, piece by piece, and we can talk about how slowly government moves and all of these things. You're going to see how quickly corporations move, right? You're about to see how quickly, because remember, competition is a sin, right? And these big boys are going to jump right in. Yes, they are. And all resources are going to be devoted to this. And then these smaller carriers, same thing. They're already. I already see it just in working at this last job for 7 weeks. They're shifting the way they operate as a smaller carrier. They're adjusting and adapting to be able to serve their demanding customers, right? Who demand a slightly higher level of service, and they're going to be positioned to be able to do that without a human being in the rig, right? And these facilities and these customers are absolutely going to retool, and then they're going to have staff. Because people are saying, well, what's the truck going to do when it gets to the customer? Because people that have driven a truck knows, every customer is kind of different, and every Home Depot warehouse is a little different than the others, and they all got their little eccentricities and all of this. Yeah, they're just going to have the self-driving truck. There's going to be some air. It's going to know where to go park, right? Uh, Somebody or something is going to disconnect from the trailer, and then that facility is going to have its own process for whatever it does with that trailer. It's not going to be that difficult, folks. It's not rocket science. The fact that people are like, oh, I have to know I got to go check in with a human, and I got to give them the right check-in information. And then they tell me, go park in the parking area. And then they tell me to go to dock door or whatever. And then I got to do these maneuvers. And, there's driver skill involved in, hitting the dock and all of this. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, the self-driving truck is not going to have to deal with any of that because there's no human there to torture. See, that all exists to torture me when I show up like a bozo to get spiritually attacked in exchange for Federal Reserve notes. See, that's my function, is to be spiritually attacked, right? Uh, by a realm that exists perhaps entirely to make an enemy of what I am. Right. So yeah, the self-driving truck there won't be any pickup numbers. There won't be any confusion over what dock door. There won't be any, hey man, you're here an hour early. We're going to open the gate, do a U-turn, and we'll see you in 59 minutes. Right. Which happens. Or, hey, you're 15 minutes late. We'll see you, at this time minus 15 minutes tomorrow or whatever, or try to get here early so this doesn't happen again. And yeah, there's truck parking at the Burger King. We'll see you in 23 and a half hours. The self-driving trucks, none of that will ever happen to them. Right. It'll just, all the computer systems will just perfectly talk to each other, and there won't be any, oh, well, what's the pickup number? There won't be any human in a guard shack. What's your pickup number? Oh, no, that's not the right number. Our numbers start with a 369. And then, okay, well, I guess I'll go over here and park in the gravel and like a fucking moron and go call my dispatch, you know. And then I'm texting dispatch. Yeah, they want a 369 number, and And then of course, dispatch doesn't want to handle it, right? And then dispatch, oh, we'll try this number. Oh, okay, I'll just walk my foolish ass back to the guard shack and all shucks, hey, if you don't mind, could you run this one up the flagpole and see if anybody salutes it, right? No, that's my dumb ass that is stupid enough to put up with all of that in exchange for pieces of paper, right? That strictly speaking have no value, right? Well, actually, they do have a value. They represent debt, lest we forget. It's a debt instrument. But meanwhile, Middle America was raised to believe that it's immoral. In some way, it's immoral to owe money. Well, I got, let me see. I got a $1 bill here. That's $1 that's owed. That's $1 of debt. This whole country's in debt. What are you talking about? Morality. Meanwhile, what do the rich people do? Rich people don't consider it to be moral to owe money or to not pay their debts, right? Even people temporarily experiencing affluence during the 0809 crash, you had people leasing Mercedes and luxury cars who were driving them to the dealership, calling an Uber, and just dropping the car off. And then the car salesman's like, what the fuck is this? We don't do this. And they're like, I don't know what to tell you, bro. I can't make these payments. And they just jump in the Uber and leave. Like for real. Because professional white collar people unable to make their payments. And we don't remember. See, this is Americans. To be in American society is to recognize that the entire financial system collapsed, and it was already collapsed, but 0809 happened. It's still 0809, and millions of people in this country lost their homes. Millions of people lost their pensions. And now it's like, hey, where did all these homeless people come from? And I'm like, what the fuck do you mean? Where did they come from? Like society produces this. This is the product of society. And it's not defensible, right? That can't be defended. Of financial systems and economies being managed and operated in ways that lead to millions of people losing their homes and millions of people losing their pensions and just having their, whatever little bit of wealth people had managed to accrue. Oh, it's gone overnight. Oh, interesting. And the people who are upper crust enough, even if they weren't rich, that because they're working jobs, your stockbrokers, your investment, just people who are, wage slaving, but $250,000 before all of this inflation, right? No, they're not morally bothered. They have a however much a month for the lease on their whatever they're driving, their late model luxury automobile. They drive it to the dealership, call an Uber, and they're out. And they're like, hey man, not my problem. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not paying any more money for this car. I'm out of here. But then the lowly, wretched Christian, salt of the earth, middle American, right? Well, they at least have again, common sense is, well, at least they have the common sense to be ashamed of themselves. For what? Being born into a system that, if they have that MS-13 spark of divinity, that born into a system that makes an enemy of what they are, right? That makes an enemy of them because bad financial times befell them, right? But if they were, but if they'd gone off to college and climbed the corporate ladder and made $250,000 a year, it'd be a little unusual, but it'd be like, yeah, all these people showed up in the last couple of days and just dropped off all these cars, right? But this is a completely different world to the people who are just, roofers or, plumbers or just doing regular jobs. What's, considered regular jobs or, Again, middle management at a big box store or whatever. Oh no, they're immoral if they don't pay their debts. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like a gaslighting it's like a whole buffet of gaslighting in this realm. It's like the individual will be gaslit to the exact level that they're willing to accept being gaslit. And the stockbroker or whoever, you can't gaslight them around what was going on in the economy because they understood it well enough to know, like, yeah, the shit hit the fan, and now I can't make my $1,500 a month lease payments, and so that's just what happens. And instead of waiting around for the tow truck to show up, I'm just going to drop this car off and take a fucking Uber back to my house that I may be in the process of liquidating, by the way. That's America, folks. That's America. If you want to know what America is, that's America. And this, middle America and the commoners and the underclass have just been so fucking beaten, have allowed themselves to be so beaten down and ran through that they identify with all of these things and defend it, and then want to try to gaslight Gen Z. Oh, Gen Z doesn't want to work. Do you know what Gen Z? I mean, imagine being a young Gen Z person. It's just like, what is wrong with these old people? And then the ones in Gen Z who have half a brain and actually are with it and sort of want to be, maybe upstanding members of society because they don't, may never understand that that's not even possible, not collectively anyway, but they're just sort of scratching their heads like, what's even going on here? Why would they? Who would expect them to want to work in these um under these circumstances? I heard recently that, so when we talk about GDP and we talk about inflation and we talk about a living wage and Americans working, 2 and 3 and 4 jobs and the gig economy and just trying to make ends meet. Well, guess what doesn't ever stop? The never ending series of record quarterly profits for large corporations, large banks, and other institutions, that never slows down. It only increases. So as Americans see that their wage doesn't really buy them much of anything anymore, as Americans increasingly are working more and more jobs and doing more and more gigs to feed and house themselves. Well, see, to an American who doesn't understand economics, they might just assume, well, okay, but everybody's got it tough. Are you crazy? Corporations are doing better than ever. Corporations' earnings are now increasing at twice the growth rate of the GDP, the gross domestic product. So the GDP, the gross domestic product, it's the idea that the economy is expanding at a certain rate. Right. It's a measure of the growth. So the overall American economy is growing at a specific rate, and the corporations, the large corporations, are growing twice as quickly as the rest of the economy. And if anybody can't understand how nightmarish and horrific that is for the people, I don't know what to tell you, because that growth is, so a corporation is becoming richer quicker because Americans are willing to work 2, 3, 4 and gig jobs and go into the gig economy to buy less conveniences, to access less entertainment, right? To be less upwardly mobile, and to see their purchasing power decline very near zero, right? And so the people like myself already on the fringes of society, and you can't gaslight me. Hell, I chose it in some way. At a certain point, just tap out. And it's like, well, I mean, the amount of money I'm able to earn, it doesn't, I mean, it's neither here nor there at this point. Now, yeah, I can wait 30 days and go back to long haul truck driving, but I got my own deal going on, spiritually, but and with the recent true knowledge of self, but in a thought experiment, you know, why would a young person who doesn't have to, why would they bother to go off to employment when one job is not going to meet their financial needs anyway? And again, it is a version of these jobs are for high school kids, these jobs are for college kids. It is a version of that. Now these jobs are for rich people who will let their kids work a job, right? It's for rich people who don't believe in spoiling their kids culturally, right? Who say, okay, we're rich, but we're going to provide a lifestyle for our children, but then they're going to have to work for anything extra that they want. That's who's going to be working some of these jobs, right? If their parents will even allow them to demean themselves, right? But it is good for them. It is good for them on some level. It's good for them to experience, some of the humiliation of the low level jobs, arguably, right? But remember, a lot of these people are not in the pull themselves up by their bootstraps, nose to the grindstone. It's, become a social media influencer, figure out how to make one's living online, remote work, a combination of maybe some door dashing, maybe some driving for Uber, a YouTube channel, right? Whatever their resources in their network or their family, maybe they can acquire some rental properties, passive income. But again, it's life as business, right? Is it possible to have a country where every single person has an actual interest in living as a business? Because that's what we're talking about. When a person they're going to drive Uber on a 1099 part of the time, part of their income is like passive from, rental properties. Now they're a fucking slumlord on some level. Maybe some of their income is hourly wage, right? That maybe they're getting an inheritance, maybe they have a trust fund over here. It's piecemeal, it's bits and pieces, right? I mean, is it even possible to have an America where just every single little fucking drone just adapts and changes and evolves and grows and they themselves become a business? Well, in a vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, that's probably the way things are headed. You know, everything, including each individual discrete human being, will operate as a business at all times. And it's already that way to some extent. And so when we address these fringes of society, it's becoming more and more clear to me that, outside of the gaslighting and the blaming the people for their own behaviors and their own choices, and with homeless people, it does, with the mental illness and the drug addiction, it does become a chicken or the egg thing at a certain point. It's like, yeah, if they really did lose their home and ended up homeless after 08, 09, at some point it's like, yeah, uh, chicken or the egg. Were they already drug addicts when they hit the streets, or are they drug addicts because they hit the streets? I mean, it's unclear some of the time. But more and more, I'm seeing this separation that's occurring, where the fringes of society more and more is just going to be the people that cannot be gaslit or coerced into doing things that are most likely against their own best interests, potentially. Again, if the people are free to have their own beliefs, right? Um, and choose their own path through this life, right? And if they can sort of figure it out for themselves and stay out of prison and somehow survive and subsist day to day, you know, how much longer is that going to be allowed? But yeah, the fringes, it's going to be more and more just the people who are either incapable or simply unwilling to go through the system of employment, but then they don't have the family support or the community support or the resources to support themselves outside of the system of employment. And now that it does default to the system itself on some level, even if that's just, hey, it's Dallas, Texas, we don't provide much in the way of services, but, or Austin, and it's like they do have some services, but then some of these, and cities are all progressive to some extent, but whichever city you forget about the West Coast cities, choose a middle America city. I don't know, Indianapolis or whoever, even if they don't want to provide a lot of services to these fringes, at some point, somebody's going to run the numbers like they did in Salt Lake City or whatever and figure out like, hey, we're not spending money to solve homelessness, but however, it turns out we spend on average $80,000 per year per homeless person, county and city, state, county, and city, because of the incarceration, the mental health, the 5150, right? Whatever just chaos these people are sowing in the streets. It's never $0, right? It's never just, oh well, quit giving them free handouts, and oh well, quit don't give the panhandlers any money, don't provide them housing, don't provide them food stamps. It's like, oh, you can do all that till the cows come home. It's still going to be 80 G's per homeless person, no matter what you choose to do. So might as well put the 80 G's to where, maybe it would benefit the individual, because it's still going to average out to 80,000. It's just that when services aren't provided, it's going to be a hardcore contingent who do enough damage to the system itself where it averages out to 80,000, even though Benton is not contributing anything towards the 80,000. That's just what it averages out. The total cost of homelessness divided by the total amount of homeless people is 80 G's a year, right? And that's actually apparently what got Salt Lake City in a big fat hurry to be like, oh yeah, we might as well actually address the real problems then. And I'm not saying they've done it perfectly, but it was like, oh yeah, wait a minute. We're paying the money anyway. Might as well at least attempt to solve. But that's love. See, that's actually, or it could be motivated by love, at least in some measure, at least eventual love, right? I was like, oh well, we're spending the money anyway. Might as well do it in a way that could be construed as loving. And then you have places like Mississippi who've effectively ended homelessness. Although I'm sure there's still people sleeping on the street. Like, part of the Memphis, Tennessee metro area is in Mississippi. I'm sure somebody's sleeping on the streets of that urban area. But, effectively speaking, there's really no homeless people in Mississippi, according to the government. And a lot of that is just, yeah, it's so grapes of motherfucking wrath to this day in Mississippi that it's like you kind of can't tell the difference. The homeless person is kind of the same thing, like not that much. It's already so impoverished that if a person is so impoverished and somehow isn't sleeping indoors every night, it's not that difficult to make it to where, well, okay, here's a very impoverished person. We just make sure they sleep indoors or have a fixed address, right? We can, somebody can fix up a shack somewhere just enough that the city will say, okay, we'll sign off on this. Let them live there, right? So this is what you want to defend, not you, the listener. So this is what some of these content creators and some of these commenters in the so-called truth community, this is what they want to defend. Are you crazy? Are you crazy? Anyway, I guess I've pretty much, I think I've pretty much covered what I wanted to cover. So thanks for watching. Bye.